Welcome to the making of Exploring the Molecular Basis of Diabetes in Minecraft Part 2. In this video, I talk about how I went about actually creating the build from start to finish. The first stage of the build was to take the experimental human body build, as shown in Part 1, and scale it up. Given that the focus of the build was diabetes and therefore the pancreas and its surrounding organs were the first things to be built. The building process for an organ involves creating a suitable two-dimensional shape of the organ from a bird's eye point of view. Once happy with the two-dimensional shape of the organ, it is built up layer by layer above and below the 2D shape, taking into account how thick or thin the organ is in different places. Once a three-dimensional shape is complete, it is hollowed out, allowing for space inside for the player to explore. The inside of the organ can then be decorated. For example, stomach acid and food molecules can be added to the inside of a stomach, and feces could be added to the inside of a large intestine. Using the experimental human body build as a guide, the pancreas, stomach, gallbladder, kidneys and liver were constructed to begin with. Next were the lungs. I constructed the first lung with the same method as the other organs. Then, to speed things up, I used a tool called MCEdit to copy and mirror the first lung. I then made small adjustments to the shape of the left lung to reflect the fact that it is smaller to make space for the heart. Next came the heart with its 4 chambers, the esophagus and the trachea, all of which the player can walk through. Then I had an idea. In the case of the experimental human body build, the player could walk from the mouth to the other end of the body over the top of the various digestive organs. So I thought it would be really cool if with the larger build, as well as looking great from the outside, the player could walk right through the body and its organs from end to end, as if they are a food particle making their journey through the digestive system. This is one of my favourite aspects of the build. With the idea of having the digestive system walk throughable in mind, I began to work on the intestines. I started with the small intestines leading from the stomach. After I had built a small length of intestines, I used MCEdit to copy, flip and paste them on top of each other to make a much longer, more realistic track. Once happy with the length and shape of the small intestines, I had them finally lead into the large intestines. I made these much larger on the inside to reflect their greater size. To give them a more realistic appearance, I added blocks to the outside to give them a bumpier texture. The body's digestive system is very long. For an average adult human, it is over 9 meters long. Having now built the intestines at a large scale, I realized it would take the player a very long time to walk through the entire digestive system. This problem was solved by adding minecart tracks between the build's longest stretches. These tracks ran mostly through the intestines, but also from the mouth to the stomach. I then added some finishing touches to the build. I added a mouth, brain, eyes, spleen, and a bladder, as well as a background body shape behind the organs. I also added some alternative routes to the build, allowing the option for players to explore the lungs, heart, brain and more, which are not part of the digestive tract. The next thing to consider was how the player would enter the build in the first place. I made a basic hub at the world spawn point, which the player could return to at any time. Walking through the blue circle at the hub leads the player to a glass bridge above the human body build. I chose to have this glass bridge at the start to allow the player to enjoy a bird's eye view of the build before exploring it internally. To give the player the option to get to the build faster, another minecart track was added alongside the glass bridge. Having finished the first build, it was time to construct a close-up, more detailed version of the pancreas. This could be accessed by the player simply walking into the pancreas of the human body build. This close-up build was to take the form of a maze, as suggested by another member of the team. I built circular acinar cells to act as the walls of the maze and used MCEdit to copy and paste them all over a blank canvas. I constructed a few islets of Langerhans in a similar manner to which the organs from the previous build had been made. The furthest islet from the start of the maze was cut open, with various coloured blocks inside to demonstrate the components of an islet: the alpha cells, beta cells, blood vessels, etc. I decided that it would be a good idea to have this cut open islet as the end point of the maze through which the player would progress to the next build. Now zooming in on the islet of Langerhans, it was time for the next build to be constructed, with a change in scale once again. The third build was a beta cell as well as a large blood vessel. The blood vessel was made by creating a long hollow tube in MCEdit. I added red blood cells, white blood cells, glucose and insulin to the inside of the tube. A team member had the idea of adding labelled blocks at the start to act as a key to the different components. Blood vessel walls consist of 3 layers, and with this in mind, a further idea for the build was implemented at the entrance to the blood vessel, in which the separate layers were peeled off and staggered at different lengths. I had the idea to provide some immersion and fun by allowing the player to parkour across the red blood cells while on their journey through the blood vessel. Once at the end of the blood vessel, a ladder leading up to the outside of the blood vessel was added, which the player could use to reach the beta cell by hopping across some insulin molecules. The build as a whole represented the movement of these insulin molecules from inside the beta cell to outside the cell and into the blood vessel via tiny pore-like holes in the blood vessel walls. The beta cell itself was constructed by using MCEdit to create a large hollow sphere. A quarter of it was removed to show its insides, where various types of glass blocks were used to show its many components such as the nucleus, Golgi apparatus, mitochondria, soft and hard endoplasmic reticulum and more. I also constructed a second, parallel blood vessel, which can be accessed by using a portal on top of the original blood vessel. Exploration of this parallel blood vessel is not necessary for the progression through the builds, but it illustrates the movement of insulin from inside the blood vessel to an exterior group of muscle cells. These muscle cells were built by creating a striped cylinder using MCEdit, cutting it in half to create a cross-section, then creating strands of blocks within the cross-section to create a fibrous look. More details on this build can be found in the 3rd video in this series. I decided that to progress to the next build, the player would need to stand on a vesicle within the beta cell build, where vesicles are small capsules found in cells that are capable of carrying molecules like insulin. A team member had the idea of making the next build a larger scale cell split down the middle. The left half of the cell would illustrate the movement of insulin contained within vesicles from within a beta cell to outside of the cell. Meanwhile, the right half of the cell would demonstrate the binding of insulin to the outside of a standard human cell, allowing glucose molecules to enter the cell. I decided to make each half cell walk throughable, allowing the player to see the vesicles, glucose and organelles in the cells up close and in greater detail. Following the pathway that stretches past the 2 half cells leads to the final build. We had already decided in the planning stage that the final build would be large-scale versions of glucose and insulin molecules. Due to the awkward shapes of these molecules, I realised that it would be difficult to make it possible to walk through them in person, so I created them at large distances away from each other to allow the player to admire them from a distance. Due to this low level of interactivity for the final build, I decided to just include this final build at the end of the split cell build, rather than having it in a whole new area that must be accessed via teleportation. It was to act as more of an epilogue to all the builds, rather than a whole new chapter. As well as large-scale versions of the molecules, I also created medium-scale versions to allow for cases where the player may have a slightly lower-end computer with a lower render distance. These slightly smaller scale builds would let players appreciate the shape of the molecules without having white fog obstruct their view. When it came to constructing these molecules, the insulin molecules models had already been provided to me by a team member, so it was simply a matter of copying and pasting them in using MCEdit. In the case of glucose molecules, I used a specialized program to convert existing glucose 3D models into Minecraft models. I then pasted them into the world and scaled them to different sizes using MCEdit. With this, the build was complete. It was now possible to explore the human body starting from the mouth, through to the pancreas, then the blood vessels, cells, and eventually individual molecules. The build now consisted of a full human body build with organs, a pancreas maze build with acinar cells and islets of Langerhans, a blood vessel and beta cell, as well as a parallel blood vessel with a muscle cell, 2 large half cells with a beta cell on one side and a human body cell on the other, and finally medium and large scale insulin and glucose molecules. Feel free to join me in part 3 to learn about some of the more advanced building techniques and software used throughout the project.